not steep. And so online gamers around the world really are what have driven most of the adoption of cryptocurrencies around the world. That's why places like China and South Korea, are as big as they are, is because those were the leading markets in the world for my old business.
And probably a quarter to 50% of all the early Bitcoin millionaires were all poker players.
Right.
It got really big on the online poker forums as a way to cash out and to transact between the different websites. And actually, in Satoshi's original code for Bitcoin, there was code for poker, poker integration. And so, and then that can lead to speculation on who Satoshi is, but we won't go down that rabbit hole. And then Brock obviously got very involved in the world of crypto. He helped found Mastercoin, Tether, Blockchain Capital, EOS. What else? A lot of other projects, they come and they go, but
just because you're first on market doesn't mean it's always the one that lasts, right?
No, especially in crypto. I mean, Bitcoin is kind of the exception to the rule. Most of the early guys really aren't around. A lot of the early startups aren't around. Coinbase, BitPay, they made it out of the crypto winter. So did a handful of others, but most of the startups that I was interfacing with, Brock and I were interfacing with when we first met, are no longer around. A lot of some similar faces, but a lot of people disappeared. And we're in one of these crypto winters again now, and I love it because what we saw beginning in 2014 after Mt. Gox imploded, we saw Charlie Shrem go to jail. There was just a series of bad news. A lot of people just disappeared, and as someone that truly believed in the technology and had wholehearted conviction around the technology, to see all the scammers, the people that were just in it to get rich quick, disappear was really great. More importantly,
these winters produce a purge.
Yeah.
It purges out all the non-believers.
And like you said on stage in Vegas, it was a stabilization of the market as well, right? Like we become more rational.
When the bull markets hit, I want to go on vacation. I don't, but it's what I want to do. Nothing good tends to happen during those moments, other than wealth, temporary wealth being created. It leads to a very irrational market. In the bear markets, as unpleasant as it is when the real work gets done.
Right. You made all your money in the bear market.
Well, it's when great things get built. It's very rare that interesting things are built in bull markets. Now, if you get really lucky, you catch the capital raise right at the end of the bull market, and so when the bear market hits you, you've got a balance sheet to work with. But anyway, you have a balance sheet to work with. This is when real work gets done. Because no one sticks around projects in these bull markets. Developers are, jumping from project to project. Everyone on your team is thinking about the thing that they're going to start. And nothing gets done well during those moments.
So before crypto, you saw this happen when companies IPO. There would be these massive brain drains. All the talent at Google, at Snapchat, at Uber. Well, not Uber yet. But whenever these companies go public and the early employees get liquidity, they all leave. The problem with crypto is that people get rich a lot quicker. Right. These bull markets come, once every couple of years, and how do you retain talent when everyone's suddenly a millionaire and everyone becomes a millionaire? I mean, anyone that actually had conviction around crypto in 2015, 2016 that I know became a millionaire. I mean, unless you were, there were some exceptions like Andreas Antonopoulos somehow fucked that up.
Well, that's because he didn't know any crypto.
Right, yeah. There are ways that you can somehow not fare well, but especially if you're holding these alts that get driven up. That's
the way you get wrecked.
Yeah. That's the way you get wrecked.
Is when you keep chasing the new coin, and you get after shit coin after shit coin until you just get, you have a portfolio of holy shit coins.
All right, sure. But
and as the shit coins are dropping, you're taking your quality coins and then doubling down on shit.
But I'll tell you, so after Augur, I'd given a small loan to the organization. I decided to put all into crypto. I put almost all the money into Bitcoin, put a little bit into Ether, and a couple $1,000s into XRP. It was just kind of a fringe bet.
probably the main stakeholder if you put a couple thousand into it.
and I just sat on it for like 2 years, and I bought it at like 0.002 cents, and then one day it was $3.50, and I had a 1,000x return, and that was the one time I actually ever cashed out. But the thing is that this happens. People realize, oh, they've got like a few thousand coins that they got for working on some project, and all of a sudden it's worth $1 million, and they cash out, and now they don't want to work on the project that they're at anymore. And retaining talent is incredibly difficult. In a bear market, that's not difficult. No one's getting rich. So all of a sudden, people actually are focused on projects. So I mean, I don't mind if this lasts a while. I mean, fortunately, I run a hedge fund, so it's not as scary for me. But it's really healthy for the development of this ecosystem. But we need to figure out a way to retain talent even in these bull markets. I don't know how to do it.
So perfect. A couple thoughts come to mind. First of all, perfect parallel. I'm a recruiter, and I specialize in tech and executive. And I started in 1997, so of course I lived through the dot-com boom and implosion. And if you could say Visual Basic, you could make like $100 an hour. You didn't actually have to know how to code it, right? So, but it's a perfect parallel because everybody started making all this money on the ICOs last year, and then it imploded, and everybody a year later is like, oh, we're going to make money overnight doing an ICO, and we're going to create this new token, and it's literally the IPO all over again. And you see, unfortunately, I would say like 80% or more, you go to these conferences and the companies that are starting up, it's just bullshit. Like, it's not a meaningful
95%.
Right? So there are a lot of really amazing use cases. Again, I've said it earlier, I believe that blockchain is the most radical revolution we'll see in human history, at least until singularity, but but there are a lot of really meaningful use cases. And right now, as a tech recruiter, what I see that we need, kind of to your point a little bit, is not just retaining talent, we need more developers going into blockchain, understanding how to write it, because it's such a niche and there's so few of them. We need the developers to be writing the technology and then evolving the technology to the next evolution so that the technologies get better and there's more and more use cases around the world. So.
Yeah, I mean, fortunately, blockchain developer salaries are amongst the highest in the world.
Yeah.
I mean, you can literally go to a coding boot camp, spend a few weeks learning how to write smart contracts, and be making 6 figures. I mean, it is the most amazing ROI on a career path that you can find, and I think people will realize that. And there is a dearth of blockchain developer talent, but those holes are getting filled. People are realizing that. The bigger issue is that we need to coalesce. Like, we're not, I mean, I don't know if Brock prefers from me, but I don't think there are going to be hundreds of blockchains. I think there are going to be 6 to 12. There are going to be 6 to 12 blockchains probably in the future, main chains. And then you have all sort of side chains, parachains, street chains, whatever you want to call them. But there are going to be 6 to 12 main blockchains. You're going to have a digital gold, a currency like stable coin. You'll have a smart contract, one that's super censorship resistant like Ethereum, one that's a little bit more scalable, a little less censorship resistant like EOS. You're gonna have maybe like even a government blockchain. But at the end of the day, what you don't want is 100 different blockchains that are not really truly interoperable. And so what we really need developers to be doing is thinking, what are the best blockchains to grow this future out? Stop thinking about what blockchains can make you rich. Which one can you actually create great interoperability in the sort of applications that you want to build? And hopefully, before the next bull rally, we do coalesce, but I think that's going to be unlikely.
If I could hop in, me being a guy that was in the real estate industry and was new to the space, quite honestly, that's what I said earlier, like 6 months ago, I didn't know it was a big, huge blind spot for me, blockchain, all that stuff, and I've become acutely aware of both of you in the space, our technology that we're building on as EOS, and I want to take the opportunity to thank you both for coming. When I came into the space, I learned about both of you right away, and when Robin said that you guys were coming, I was like, I'll believe it when I see it. So I really appreciate that, and that's a testament to you guys about how approachable and humble you guys are, and I really appreciate you guys coming to our event. But my question that kind of stems off that is, if someone's new to the space, like me and some people in the crowd, what would you recommend? Like, we're thirsty for knowledge. We want to make ourselves more and more educated on the space. Like, how do you recommend someone like us, someone in the crowd, like kind of onboard into the space so we can get to the point where we're doing the high-level conversations that you guys are having?
Well, congratulations, you've done it. The most important thing in life is showing up. It all starts basically with that. You've shown up, and there begins your journey. It's taking the time to invest in yourself by empowering yourself with knowledge and information, and the rabbit hole runs deep, and you're going to keep going down that rabbit hole. The most important thing is, don't get caught up in the FOMO, the fear of missing out and chasing a buck, listening to what everybody else is doing and then following them blindly. It's not about like trying to make a quick buck. This is a very long game. The entire world is about to be transformed by this. Don't do anything that you don't understand yourself. Take the time to invest in yourself, empower yourself so that you make thoughtful, informed decisions for yourself. But hopefully that selfishness evolves into selflessness, and you go from the focus on me to eventually the consciousness of we. And so, but this is it. There's 100 different paths you can go down in this space. I like to tip my hat to Satoshi, since he used a Japanese pseudonym. So I like to use Japanese words to describe some of this, and one of the terms I like to describe is a concept known as ikigai. Ikigai is figuring out what you love, what you're passionate about, what you're good at, those things that come naturally to you based upon your innate skills or whatever it is that you've done in your life that's led you to the point that you are now, and what the world needs. And the intersection of that Venn diagram is finding your life's purpose. And for each of us, it's going to be different. And so figuring out how, as you empower yourself with this knowledge, how to incorporate that with your skills, with the things you're passionate about, but those things that also serve others. And when you find that, life gets awesome, and it doesn't even matter. The money is irrelevant. Because if you're doing what you love, and you're doing what you're good at, and you're doing something that's going to make the world a better place, whether you're making a bunch of money or not won't matter. And most likely, you'll make more money than ever by doing that. If money is your focus, it's generally going to evade you. It's like sand. The harder you grip it, the faster it runs through your fingers. When you start just doing things for the right reasons, with the right intentions, when everything's in alignment, good things happen.
I'll give a much more literal answer.
That's why you've got two of us.
I like philosophical too.
So when I got into this space, really late 2013, 2014, there were no resources. It's why I founded my nonprofit, the Blockchain Education Network, so young people could come together, create their own resources, and share them between their universities around the world.
How many, I didn't mention it, how many college campuses, how many groups assembled during your 2013,
Wait,
2014?
let me expand on that in case people don't know. One of the brilliant things that Jeremy did when he was in school was he started getting involved at his school campus, and then he had the idea to unite all these other universities around the country, and he created, like almost overnight, I don't know how long it took, but he literally created this entire community where everybody was thriving and synergizing and learning. So on the question, anybody can get involved at any point. It's to educate yourself, and he did this by creating this entire community and then had this amazing success shortly thereafter.
But it is really about
How many campuses? How many?
So those first 3 months, it was really extraordinary. We started with MIT, Stanford, and the University of Michigan, and by the end of the semester, we had over 100 chapters in 20 plus countries on every habitable continent.
Jeremy and the wonderful community that he developed there educated the world's universities, and this generation of 20-somethings that are doing blockchain and have been doing it for a few years. He's done extraordinary things. Forget the projects, because that didn't pay him anything.
Right. No, that cost me a lot of money. But it spawned a tremendous number of startups, including Augur, IOTA, a handful of big ones, some that have yet to be announced. But the students that have come out of that network have gone on to do remarkable things for this industry. But now it's much easier to be educated. I started a magazine. It's called Distributed. It's 108-page primer on blockchain technology. Comes out twice a year. It's distributed.com. I should have brought copies. So.
We'll bring them on Thursday.
But yeah. So it's a great text primer. I've got a portfolio company that's called goodbit101.com, and they're just like easy to understand. Written and video tutorials on blockchain technology, Bitcoin. If you're a coder, our friends started Kingsland Academy, so the accredited academy for blockchain developer training.
That got founded out of our trip to Burning Man, Africa, or what they call Africa Burn.
What's it called?
Kingsland Academy.
Kingsland Academy.
Yeah.
A group of friends came to our Africa Burn camp, and there was born Kingsland.
Yeah. And it's a very interesting project because they've trained over 250 developers so far. I mean, it's really remarkable. But you have to choose the path that you're going down. Are you going to be working in business development, or are you going to learn are you going to be a coder? Because those are two very divergent paths. Everyone should read the Satoshi white paper. Everybody should read probably the Ethereum white paper. But beyond that, you have to choose the path that you're going to take. But you need to understand the core components. One of the biggest problems I saw in the 2017 run-up was that people got really excited about blockchain technology. They saw all these ICOs, but they skipped over the education. They're like, oh, it's this decentralized database, censorship resistant. Didn't really get anything else. You really have to go in and immerse yourself. I mean, the bare minimum you should spend on this tech before starting a company in this space, 100, 200 hours, just reading, watching, immersing, going to meetups, talking to people, just understanding different angles. There's so much you really have to do to really confidently build in this space and be able to iterate as this ecosystem evolves. The fact is that we're dealing with a database structure, and they're really evolving. Besides Bitcoin, all these blockchains are kind of evolving. All these new blockchains offer new feature sets, and you need to understand the trade-offs. Nothing doesn't have a trade-off. I know they like to say EOS is Ethereum but better, but they're trade-offs. And it's a perfect example of where you really need to understand.
Is that what they say?
Some people do. And sometimes you have to recognize that, some people may not see those trade-offs, but they're always there. I mean, from Bitcoin to Ethereum, there were trade-offs, Ethereum to EOS, and so on and so forth. And if you don't understand the underlying technology, look, I'm not a technologist. I've never written a line of code, but I spend enough time immersed in this ecosystem that I can understand the nuance and the difference between how these technologies work, and that's really important if you really want to be a part of this movement, because at the end of the day, it is a technology. It's also a movement, but it's a technology, and it needs to be understood at a deep level.
Really quick, so as a tech recruiter, I believe everybody should learn to code at least at a basic level, and we're seeing really interesting things.
Are you recommending we learn how to code in BASIC?
God, how old are you, Brock?
Again, I'm back then. We don't look it, but I'm an old timer.
We both just dated ourselves with basic COBOL. Everybody should learn to code, and what we're seeing across the country, in the United States at least, is, and well, actually everywhere, there's a lot of push for education for children to learn how to code as curriculum in schools. Jeremy Ring was one of the first employees of Yahoo. He's a Florida resident. He was then a senator here in Florida for 10 years. I believe he'll be joining us today. But he pushed for coding as curriculum, as legislation in Florida. We have the mayor of Miami pushing for blockchain as curriculum in elementary schools. So we have a lot of grassroots efforts at the most basic level with the younger generation, right? So that's a really cool development too.
Yeah, I mean, if you don't have a career yet, coding is definitely recommended. I think it's the best place to start. It's a skill set that's invaluable no matter what you do. And if you're just thinking about switching careers, I mean, spending $30K on a coding boot camp, it's the best money you'll ever spend.
They call them languages for a reason.
Yeah.
Like knowing how to speak English is pretty valuable on this planet right now.
Or to be able to
Speaking
read.
Spanish is, learning how to read. Learning how to read and write in these new languages is useful.
And I guess to Ron's point, to your guys' point, you don't need to be fluent per se, but you should be at least conversational to understand it at a decent level. One of the things I'd love to have the opportunity to ask you guys, because one of the things we were talking about this morning, what's your guys' opinion on the future of tokenization of real assets, real estate, things like that?
Well, so I've obviously focused on this as much as almost anyone, having come up with and started Tether, which was putting the first real world asset on the blockchain, and it's doing about $2 trillion a year of trading volume, so it's not insignificant. Second most traded currency after Bitcoin. Then Jeremy and the rest of us over at Blockchain Capital created the first security token. We tokenized Blockchain Capital's Fund 3, which was really an experiment. I think I'm assuming Jeremy watched a lot of these conversations, or at least a number of them, for about a year. Well, when the Jobs Act was first passed, I ran one of the top 10 syndicates on Angel List. I was always following crowdfunding activity very closely, the Kickstarters, the Indiegogos, and the Jobs Act, I got it instantly, recognizing that Reg S, Reg D, Reg A+, Reg A, these things were going to have a big impact on capital formation. And so I went and became an advisor to Distilled Jeans and Investment, which was the second Reg A offering, and I got very involved in the crowdfunding stuff on the side while all the crypto thing was happening, recognizing that those two industries would converge. And so for about a year before we did the BCAP, or the first security token, I was telling people, security tokens. Have you been following Reg S and Reg D? There's ways to do this compliantly. Regulators, there's going to be major issues with regulation here, depending upon what you're doing. You know what the Howey test is. And half the people I were meeting didn't even have lawyers advising them. They were just like, well, so-and-so did it this way, so I assume it's fine. And I was trying to put the fear of God into people, going, no, it's not okay. You need to make sure you get lawyers, make sure you get consulted. This stuff is, you are playing in very regulated waters, whether you realize it or not. And so I kept trying to convince people to do a security token, and no one would do it. So eventually it's like, all right, fine, I'll do it myself, open source the idea, and let's see what happens. And so we did that almost about 2 years ago now. We started it about 2 years ago.
We announced it in December of 2016.
Yeah, and so I'm a big fan of tokenization, which can also be called securitization. What we're doing is, and I will say this with a straight face, especially with the artistic bills in the back, we are watching the emergence of a quadrillion dollar market emerge. A quadrillion, 1,000 million is a billion, 1,000 billion is a trillion, 1,000 trillion is a quadrillion, other than when you learn math. You're not going to see that number very often. And the reason why is we're about to watch the securitization of the world's currencies, of the world's debt markets, of the world's equity markets, of the world's real estate, of the world's energy. And as you start to watch the securitization or tokenization of all of these mainstream assets, just because of the security and efficiency that it provides, as well as the fractionalization and the micropayments and all the things that you can start to do thanks to this technology, we're going to watch a quadrillion dollar market emerge. So just because we're in a bear market right now shouldn't get your hopes down. This is still the beginning. I think that we are right now, and I've definitely been, I've made a mistake in some of my past predictions as I tried to find the analogy to compare us to, call it the Internet 1.0. As the Internet was being developed in the 1970s and 80s and early 90s, it wasn't useful to very many people because you didn't have the bridges, the roads, the tunnels. You didn't have the basic infrastructure. You didn't have an internet browser. You didn't have an email client. You didn't have content of things to read, consume, or buy. Until you had a critical mass of these things and the right tools available, it was not able to go mainstream. It wasn't able to reach its tipping point. And in 1995, when Netscape emerged, that mentalities around any cryptocurrency is the equivalent of religious fundamentalism. My chain is better than your chain. We've learned over thousands of years that mentality is not a good one, that it does not serve humanity as a whole. If anyone makes the world a better place, we all win, so good luck. Let's continue all of our experiments. It's just a bunch of A/B or split testing. But EOS being the first third generation protocol, of which there's going to be many others. It just happens to have been first market. You now can build consumer applications. You can build consumer dApps. This is the equivalent of when the iPhone first came out and you got the Apple App Store. And guess what? The first apps that were put in there were all pretty shitty.
Right.
But we now have that, and EOS won't be the only platform that can deliver on that, but it is the first. I believe we are at that moment where you can now build highly scalable applications that don't have any fees for first-time users, which you can't. That's a level of friction that will turn off 99% of people. It has to be frictionless, it has to have low latency, it has to be high speed, and it clearly has to be scalable. We now have that where applications can be built on blockchain. This is that Netscape moment. This is that Apple App Store moment, in my opinion. Of course, it doesn't all hit overnight. These things take years more to continue to develop. I mean, the internet, they said it was dead in the year 2000. If you were here for most people probably didn't live through the internet 1.0 bubble. In the year 2000, if you went into your venture firm, if you went to your investment bank, you went to your private equity, wherever it is that you worked in the investment climate, if you went into your team and said, I want to invest in this internet company, you'd be fired on the spot for even uttering the words. Because the internet was dead. The internet was a science experiment that was proven to have no value and no businesses would ever come out of it. And this went on for 2 years. There was not a single company that could get funded. You would be fired on the spot from your firm for even suggesting investing in the internet. Take companies like eBay, profitable company, beyond proven to be a real business. It was trading below cash. Every single public internet company, every internet company went out of business, and the profitable ones were trading below their balance sheets because the internet was dead. And clearly, 1995 to 2000, we may have the blockchain is dead moment, which isn't now. This is just a bear market. The market is still moving. Deals are still getting funded. Stuff is still happening. The barrier to entry, the bar has gotten a lot higher. You know, the expectation that you have more than a white paper, you know, that you actually have a minimally viable product, preferably, you know, some product market fit, you know, a handful of things, you know, some actual activity on your platform, a real team, teams that have actually shipped products before, you know, that's what's changing right now. But I do think we're still at that 1995 moment.
Let me ask a good question to the audience. So listen if you weren't before. Please raise your hand if you would be comfortable storing and sending a large amount of Bitcoin. So that to me, and we're at a Bitcoin meetup, that's why to me I think we're 1 or 2 years away from that Netscape moment. I think
in 1995, if I asked a group of people, would you be comfortable storing sensitive information on your computer and sending it over this new thing called the internet? You know,
would you have a single hand raised?
Again, it's I agree with you that the market isn't going to explode overnight, but I think, you know, the tools are there. The only thing that...
So my point is that the one tool that isn't there that I think we really need to figure out that is not figured out fully enough yet is custodianship. How to fully custody funds in applications.
Now I feel like I'm becoming an EOS evangelist, which I really don't like doing, especially because of my association with the project. Code is law is an idea that's talked about. And we are definitely not ready for code is law, which I think is the point that you're making, because the level of sophistication and the quality of the tools that need to be used, from custodianship, security, making sure that you don't lose your wallet and all your things, the world is not ready for that. The thing that is most fascinating about EOS, more than anything else, and this is something I hope other projects get into because none of them are doing it yet, really, is the idea of a constitution. You know, this goes back to the days of the Magna Carta, the founding of this country. The idea that you have a constitution in there and the fact that you've got arbitration capabilities, meaning if someone steals your stuff, you can get it back. These are the sorts of things, I think, for, again, Moby to go mainstream that are going to be essential for a blockchain. It'll take an entire generation of people before everyone's going to be ready to live in a world where code is law. In this hybrid phase, this phase where people are going to be intermediate to beginner and having to become adept and capable of using these types of tools, have to have dispute resolution systems. You have to have the ability, to arbitrate issues and to resolve disputes. And that needs to be governed by a constitution. We are literally sitting in a moment, and I don't know whether EOS will be, I don't know if it's the Friendster, the MySpace, the Facebook, the Snapchat, the Instagram, and whatever else comes next, built on blockchain. But we are witnessing a document being created that is as substantial as the Magna Carta, as important as the Declaration of Independence and our Constitution and our Bill of Rights. And if you're not following that aspect of the project, it's something just intellectually to be at that founding moment where these types of documents are being created that are likely going to govern our entire world in the not too distant future. And again, I don't know whether EOS will be the one that does it, but I think it's worth noting the reason it's going to take a generation before the technology gets there and people become skilled enough. And the only way to resolve for that is by having some type of global constitution and a dispute resolution system similar to that which has been built around EOS. Not done yet, it's a work in progress, and they may not get it right. The biggest risk factor that EOS probably has, more than anything, is getting these things wrong. It's very hard for the first one to get it right. But it's a brave new world.
That's powerful. One of the things, maybe the direct question of what we're all kind of talking about here is where do we go from mass adoption? Is it a use case? Is it education? How does that happen? Our founder, Ryan Poole, he said that one of the things that he really looked into is when he studied projects that were successful, it's what projects got the most tokens into the most hands early on. So we're a Reg D.
There are no successful projects. I don't know how you conduct a study on that. We don't have any user adoption yet.
All right, you're clearly the bear. I'll take the bull. I think it is happening, and I think that by this time next year, you're going to see it. And when you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And so I view the world from the prisms or the perspectives that I have that have been developed over the course of my life. Gaming is clearly going to be one of the main drivers of mass adoption here in the short term. Again, I use the analogy of the Apple App Store, the browser. We could say when Facebook allowed people to begin building apps on it, we're seeing it around gaming applications. And you're starting to see real traction. Gaming is going to be a massive driver of adoption in the short term. The other big one is going to be financial inclusion, which is fortunately one of the ones that, games are not the thing that's going to change or save the world, but it will drive a lot of adoption. 2/3 of the population of the planet don't have basic financial tools. They're unbanked or underbanked. Latin America, Africa, Southeast Asia. This technology is going to democratize the global financial system in a way where every human being on the planet is going to have equal access. And the least fortunate billions of people are going to be the biggest beneficiaries. If we were going to remake Maslow's hierarchy of needs today, consistent access to the internet, a cell phone, and financial tools are essential to live a life of prosperity, to have the potential to live call it a prosperous life. Aside from winning the lottery, these are essential things at this point. This technology is going to democratize the global financial system where everybody has access. In the same way that Africa leapfrogged wired telecommunications and skipped straight to wireless. These regions of the world are not going to have bank accounts in a traditional sense. And it's not because the banks are the bad guys.
Well, they are.
They are not your friends.
Hold on, but I want to explain why it is. It's not like there's a group of banksters that are sitting around saying, hey, let's screw the poor. It's called, and it's not that regulators are trying to screw the poor, but regulators trying to do their jobs, to try and control consumers and all the things that they're supposed to do. Most people do have good intentions. It's the collective just situation creates these unfortunate set of circumstances.
Well, and banking the poor is often not a good business.
Well, the point is regulations make it so that most of the world's poor can't be banked. They're not allowed to be banked because they don't have an address. Financial regulations require that you have a certain set of prerequisite boxes that must be checked. And the world's poorest people can't check the box. They literally can't meet the minimum requirements necessary to be banked. And then from a business perspective, it's not profitable either. And banks are for-profit companies that have a fiduciary duty to deliver value for shareholders. They're not charitable organizations that are set up to bank the unprofitable. And so they're not necessarily, it's not a bunch of bad people sitting around, how do we, make life bad for people? It's a set of unfortunate circumstances that over time continue to mount up, and they've created the circumstances in which we live. But this technology is going to change that. And so take a look at a place like the Philippines. The Philippines has a population of roughly 100 million people. 80% of the population of the Philippines is unbanked. It's English speaking. There's more cell phones than people. It was Friendster's largest market, the first successful social network. They're very technology savvy. They're the largest market in the world per capita for money remittance. Filipinos move to India, the Middle East, all over the world to work, but to send money back home to their families. Like, they care about their families more than almost any culture in the world. They don't just leave and let their grandmothers live in a nursing home. They take care of their own. They're very, very family-oriented people, and they send so much money through money remittance. The stars are entirely aligned around that country for mass adoption of financial inclusion. The president is on board, the central bank is on board, and the incumbent banks are on board in supporting this because they recognize that 80% of their people need help. And so all of the stars have aligned in the Philippines, and I think it's going to be the first market where we see mass adoption of cryptocurrency for the purposes of delivering financial inclusion. 5% of the population of the Philippines today are already using blockchain for their financial transactions, primarily through a company called Coin.ph. But the Philippines is happening. And as that starts to happen, as we build lighthouses where the rest of the world can see, call it rising tides, rebalancing the world and raising all ships, we can start to see that happen. I think it'll likely happen in places like Uganda, where you've got refugee camps. We're already starting to see it in places like Venezuela, but for the absolutely worst reasons, in the sense that the circumstances are just so horrible there. I mean, it's heart-wrenching. But you're starting to see it. You're starting to see it in Argentina. You're seeing it in places where the need is the greatest, is where the impact is happening the fastest. But that's another area where we're starting to see it. And 5% of the population of a 100 million person country is, I call that the beginning of real adoption. That's not, a minor number.
But I think it's going to be a trudge. Look, I run a social impact fund. This is what I care about more than anything. Financial inclusion is a big component of our investment thesis. But if we talk about the path towards mainstream adoption globally, I think Brock is right. It's going to be gaming. I think a viral crypto.
Hey, you agree with me?
Well, we had this conversation on stage 3 weeks ago. But
at NASDAQ.
But a CryptoKitties, Pokemon Go game that just goes absolutely viral will likely be the catalyst for the mass adoption of crypto assets.
It's going to be more gambling.
Or gambling, sure. But
wait, it's not going to be gambling in the future too, though. As a gaming person, most of my career outside of this space has been in the games industry. We're going to see something, a convergence of, call it that Venn diagram again, where you've got gambling, you've got gaming in terms of entertainment, and that kind of where those two things intersect, where you start to see what I call reward-based gaming because of this type of technology where, and you have the virtual currency multiplayer sort of marketplaces. At the intersection of all of that is going to be a hybrid of all three of them. It's going to be less gambling per se, but something where...
Well, there will be a gambling component as well as a trading.
Might come faster than people realize because of the same economic incentive that made Bitcoin interesting. If my thesis is correct, that adding liquidity to the market will create appreciation in the underlying asset, that means if you have a $100,000 house or a $1 million house, it'll probably cost you $2,000, $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 to tokenize it because you're going to have to update title and all the things and that'll come with it. But when that happens, if your house goes from $1 million to $2 million, or $100,000 to $200,000, and it costs you $5,000 to make the, call it migration from a paper title to a digital fractionalized titling system, that's a strong economic incentive. When people start to realize that the amount of value they can unlock in what is, for at least most Americans, their primary asset, you can see this actually happen quite quickly because it won't require us, the entrepreneurs. Once the platform is built, you've created an economic incentive where there's so much value there to be unlocked for homeowners across the country, or people that don't own homes that see the opportunity, kind of like in 2005, 6, and 7, where they could rush out and borrow money to get access to a property to then unlock value in it. The economic incentive is so big that it could come a lot faster. It might not take 10 years, I predict 10. Yeah. But the economic incentive is such that this could come much faster, at least in where you see huge numbers happening because the incentive is so big.
It's interesting, and we talked about this in some of our meetings. What is the one thing that has a relationship with every single human since the beginning of time? That's land. Everyone has a relationship in some way or another. Until we start living in space, we have a relationship with land. And to your point, in terms of daily users, would you say
you still call it space?
Still space?
Land is space.
I would say that Zillow, which our project would stand to take the legs out from underneath, they have 170 million unique visitors to their platforms per month. So I think that what you're predicting is very, very, very realistic, and for how many people it touches. And I think that it's interesting, because what is the vestibule that brings tokenization, crypto out of the shadows more into the mainstream? Mass adoption. And I just watched the movie Middleman, and it was the adult film industry that brought online payments in 1997.
I left that one out, but adult applications will also likely be a substantial driver of this, because it's the same story, kind of.
I mean, Uber for escorts. It's going to be a massive business. just wait for it. That's getting built on the blockchain for sure.
Do you want the domain?
I already bought it.
But this is what the ICO movement really got right. Kind of the tokenization of anything. And if you're creating value, whether you have a solar panel on the roof of your house, or you have or let's say a fully automated car in the future, or you have a home that you want to rent. The sharing economy got us partway there. There are all these middlemen. There's the Uber, the Airbnbs, the Lyfts, the Getarounds. But in a decentralized world, you can disintermediate those guys. You can get rid of them, and this is through the tokenization of assets, and it's through blockchain technology. It's a future that's not tomorrow, not the day after, but in the years to come, we're going to find robust governance mechanisms for these blockchain protocols that allow us to disintermediate everyone except the value creator and the consumer. And that's an ideal world to live in.
Yeah, those are the stocks I tell people privately. I normally don't say this publicly to avoid. Are the companies that rely on network effect and solely as a middleman. The Ubers and the Facebooks, being the best examples of them. The Amazons of the world and the Apples of the world still have
They're not going anywhere.
They're not going anywhere because they actually have real barriers to entry. The fulfillment infrastructure that Amazon has. Apple, hardware doesn't get made overnight. But when all you have is a network effect, where you have a very simple software, application, but because you've aggregated a critical mass of buyers and sellers, drivers and passengers, whatever that might be, those businesses are the most ripe for disruption. Because all they have is their network effect. And when you go and say, I'm creating Uber but keeping no revenue, or I'm creating Facebook and giving the revenue back to the users and ownership of their own data, as you start to see that around those types of businesses, they're the ones that are the most vulnerable. They'll be the first to fall.
But it's not even just a disruption, it's an evolution or a revolution. Those companies and industries go out of business, right? Because
they re-emerge in a decentralized, user-centric fashion. We're always going to have social networks. We're going to have ride sharing, but it's going to be done in a different way in which, it's cheaper, faster, more affordable.
well, like somebody said in Vegas, banks won't be banks anymore. Like banks will be used to store private keys and distribute pieces of your private keys, right? Like you won't use banks.
Banks will exist for a long time because a lot of people don't want to manage their own financial services. And most people do not want to be their own bank. It is
because we need third parties to control us and tell us how we can use our own money, right? And
well,
tell us how to invest our money.
I wouldn't want my mom or dad managing their own private keys. I mean, they lost my social security card the other day. Like, it's just like, this is not, it's not something that a lot of people are well equipped for today. This is why custodianship is such a big deal. There will be third parties where people need a service that they can't provide themselves. But a Facebook where you own your data and you choose who you sell it to, that's something that everybody can use. It just needs to be done correctly. And a lot of, the biggest lacking point for this industry, this is why I'm a bit skeptical on what Brock was saying earlier, or about us being at this point right now for consumer dApps. I've not seen one really great consumer dApp that I really want to use. UI, UX, user interface, user experience. There's still...
When did you get your first iPhone?
Oh, I had the iPhone, I don't know.
Were you in the App Store when the Apple App Store first opened?
No.
Were you in there in the first 6 months?
No, and I'm with you, and we're getting there. But keep in mind, the apps that Apple put out were good. They had good applications. So some of the third-party apps were not great, but the Apple apps worked. And they were functional. And most of the consumers...
They had a few years head start knowing what they were releasing.
Right.
It takes the rest of us a moment to figure it out.
And we're going to get there. We're going to get there. But we also have to figure out, what do you want to decentralize? Not all things are going to be decentralized. Like gaming applications, unless there's a betting or monetary component, there's not much use case for decentralization. And decentralization for the sake of decentralization is the stupidest thing I've ever seen. There's a world in which it just makes sense for technology or games to be decentralized because they'll actually be faster and more scalable than centralized applications today, but that's not where we're at.
Well, on the gaming side, I'll make it very clear where the specific opportunity is. It's in the payment friction. When you study things like LTVs and ARPU and WARPU and MARPU, and as you start to understand kind of what the gaming business is, which is user acquisition, what's it cost to acquire a user, what's your CPA, and what is that LTV, and what is that ARPU over some period of time, average revenue per user, cost per acquisition, lifetime value, being those acronyms. When you go to make a payment in the App Store, you download a game in your Android Google Play or in your Apple App Store, you go to make a payment, there's a lot of friction. When you play a game on Facebook, I'm not sure how much of that still happens, not like it used to, but when you did that, the amount of friction that's there. When you're paying with a digital currency out of a blockchain-based wallet, the click, pay, the fact that it can be done in-app, so frictionless, is already showing LTVs that are 4 to 5 times that in normal markets. So the data is already in. And it's not about the game itself being built on the blockchain.
Right.
It's about payment systems like these that are going to drive business.
I could literally run my entire business on LinkedIn or Facebook because we could set meetings, set appointments, get maps, do payments. Like literally I could run my entire business through one of those social networks.
And you don't want to do that with a blockchain. You don't want to run your entire business on a blockchain. It's about, my friend John Backus, he has a blog post on Medium that I recommend everyone reads. It's called Minimal Viable Decentralization. You only decentralize the components of your business that need to be decentralized. Everything else you should have decentralized. If it doesn't need to be decentralized, don't decentralize it. And typically, that's the only things that you need to decentralize are payments and record keeping. You know, you want the immutability of the blockchain, and you want those interoperable payments. Everything else should not be decentralized. Trying to build everything on top of a blockchain is complicated. It's more vulnerable to failure, hacking, all sorts of problems. You only decentralize what you need to, and then everything else you do in a much more traditional manner, at least for now. I think that will develop over time, but right now, you just decentralize what you have to.
Right, and payments is one of the largest
Yes.
areas for sure.
That's powerful. Is there anything that you guys want to relay to the audience in terms of your social impact of doing Puerto Rico, crypto castles? And
No, Brock never talks about that.
Well, I'll cover two items, which is one, Puerto Rico. We're in Miami. Puerto Rico's fairly close. You know, come on down, check out what's happening there. Lot of startup activity, a lot of blockchain activity. About 1,500 people have moved down there. About 500 have stayed. But I mean, every day, more and more people are arriving, which is you know, a wonderful thing to see. We're starting to see the first Puerto Rican startups founded by Puerto Rican entrepreneurs ever being funded, raising millions of dollars. It's never happened before. There was no such thing as Puerto Rican startups that had raised money. Any Puerto Rican entrepreneur had to move to Silicon Valley or somewhere else. You know, we're starting to see wonderful things happen there. Come down and check it out. It's the only place a U.S. citizen can live and pay no federal income tax. You know, Florida has no state income tax. If you live in Puerto Rico, you have no federal taxes.
Yeah, let
You
that
have
sink
no
in.
federal taxes. Because you can't have taxation without representation. And if you are a resident of Puerto Rico, you're not allowed to vote on the U.S. president. There's a bunch of reasons why this is. But it's you live anywhere else in the world, you still pay tax. You know, this is the only place American citizens can live and pay no federal income tax. Zero capital gains, you know, things like that. There's another tax that's taking effect this month, known as the Special Opportunity Zone taxes. So the biggest tax reform that we've had in the last 30 or 40 years is Trump's most recent bill, which takes effect now, which is if you take your capital gains and you invest it into an opportunity zone fund. Opportunity zones being places in the United States where economic development is needed, typically low-income areas. Puerto Rico, 98% of the island is an opportunity zone. But if you invest your capital gains into a fund that invests into these places that need economic stimulus, and your money is locked up for 10 years, you get it back without having to pay capital gains. And so now an American can live anywhere in the world and pay no capital gains tax. This will probably only last 2 years or 6 years, depending upon whether or not Trump gets reelected. Because there's $300 billion a year of capital gains that normally the IRS is taxing. Now $300 billion of capital has the potential to be directly invested, you know, into funds that are investing into poor neighborhoods that need help without any of it going through the government.
It's the biggest tax loophole in American history.
Yeah. By the way, it is December, so make sure you forecasted your tax needs before December 31st. And if you do have any capital gains, I know the crypto markets are down, so those gains are probably not what they once were. But if you do, make sure you're investing in a neighborhood that needs help.
Awesome. Do you want to say anything about the crypto camp?
And by the way, real estate is the main thing that people invest in this regard. But you can invest in businesses. If you're a startup, like if you have a startup, you should be moving your company into one of the opportunity zones around Miami.
That's right.
Because if your startup is based in, if you're working out of an opportunity zone, you can go to angel investors. VCs don't care about taxes because it comes out of their LPs, not them. So they tend not to care. But angel investors or sophisticated investors that have tax strategies, which VCs never do. They're not very sophisticated. But
Watch yourself.
Ding, ding, ding.
well, no, because they don't get any benefit. It's called they only care about themselves, and what's good for their LPs doesn't even matter. That's why they all use C corps. An LLC or an S corp is so much more efficient. You know, if you create your company as an LLC or an S corporation, and you raise $1 million, You normally don't have profits in the beginning, most startups. You normally just have losses. But what happens is those losses become a tax benefit that pass through to all your investors, effectively lowering the cost of the investment. But no VC will invest in that vehicle because they're lazy. And it doesn't directly line their pockets. That's the reason why C Corps are demanded by VCs. It's so stupid. But if you move your company into an opportunity zone, you can go to an investor and say, give me your capital gains, 10 years, you pay no tax, you were going to give it to the IRS anyway, give it to me, but now you have your big upside. That doesn't mean that people are just going to give you their money, but what you've done is lowered the bar to make it easier to raise capital. And so anyone doing startups the next 2 years, if you're in San Francisco, you should be moving to Oakland. If you're in Miami, I don't know what the neighborhood is, but maybe it's Little Havana. No. Wherever you go.
Everywhere north of Brickell, pretty much in downtown, is in EOZ. Right. I'm starting a new company here in Miami, and that's where our office will be.
This is very, very valuable.
If you're a founder,
and something that almost no one understands. I just happen to geek out on these things.
And be friends with all the wrong people. I just moved to
those.
Like Jeremy Gardner?
Like you. Steve Bannon.
By the way, Steve Bannon's here today. If you want to say hello.
Not really.
Steve Bannon was my right hand for 7 years.
That's something I would bury so deep in the closet.
I've got nothing to hide.
I am now here in Miami part-time. I am a resident of Florida. Did not make the jump to Puerto Rico. I will go see it this upcoming weekend or after Basel. But I'm happy to be a resource to people. I am a venture capitalist. I do have a fund. I have a house here, a new crypto castle, right in Miami Beach. And so feel free to come speak to me after. I don't have any business cards, but I am easy.
We want a tour of the crypto castle.
That can be arranged at some point. Not
We
today.
should raffle one off today.
All right. Well, thank you very much for having us.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
I really appreciate it.
Oh, wait, guys. Can we stay you guys for a few more minutes? I'm sure there's a million questions. Can we stay for a few more minutes? Sure. Because I think what I haven't seen in a lot of these conferences is the opportunities with you guys one-on-one, and everybody kind of bum rushes you afterwards. So if we could spend a few minutes.
I would love to avoid the bum rushing.
Adam, thank you.
I'm Rob, I'm the co-founder of EOS Miami, and thank you Ryan, Beckett, Ryan Poole, and Real Trade for comping us all with EOS Miami tickets today. So just to shout out, like most of the EOS Miami people are game developers and artists and stuff, so I'm really happy like everything you said. I have a little question, but just to give us a little spiel. What we're trying to do at EOS Miami is like get out of the whole like kind of crypto ghetto, so we're actually entering like non-crypto like hackathons and things. So we won the largest hackathons in Miami. We were the only organization that had EOS blockchain app at the first blockchain conference in San Francisco. We won the EOS hackathon in San Francisco, their social impact awards that we're doing. So yeah, well,
Congratulations.
Thanks. I mean, it's a team effort. We're all here today. So our question is, so Vitalik, has said several times that Ethereum would benefit greatly if he stepped away. Like, basically, in fact, his personality, he says, it's holding back. So now, recently, there's a lot of statements about with Dan Larimer possibly stepping away from EOS. So, what's the analogy there? If that ever happened, if Dan Larimer stepped away from EOS?
Dan Larimer and Vitalik are such different people. I think the cult of personality around Vitalik is at an order of magnitude that Dan Larimer will never be able to achieve, just due to the fact that he's jumped from one project to the next, and now obviously
Successful project to successful project to successful project.
depending on how you define success.
The most used blockchains in the world, I think that qualifies.
But importantly,
Just to be fair, meaning he shipped product repeatedly and successfully.
Importantly, I mean, look, I totally back.
By the way, I love Vitalik, but I'm just saying.
I think it's important to know that in any decentralized organization, any open source project, having cult of personalities is generally not a good idea. You want something that is a really robust kind of governance architecture that allows people to work on the project no matter who's in charge. That's the whole point of decentralization. If we have these demigods, I mean, this is a total joke, sure. I mean, if we have these demigods, it's incredibly dangerous, the long-term health of these projects. So, like, good on Dan for going ahead. I mean, I think it's a terrible situation for EOS, but I think it's good that he creates these projects and leaves. But
he hasn't left.
He hasn't left yet.
And he made it very clear he's not leaving.
Right.
The thought of people taking his words and parsing out selective words because he was talking about another idea. Clearly, we all have lots of ideas. Just because he's got another idea and has other things on his mind doesn't mean that he's abandoning the project, and he made it very, very, very clear that he is not leaving the project. Just to make set the record straight.
Projects should be designed in ways where the lead developer behind them is not a contingency on the project's success. Right. That being said, what you do want to see is commitment to the projects long term, because these are often the chief evangelists for the projects themselves, and you lose a lot of enthusiasm for the project when the person that inspired you to join leaves. And so you have to have that under consideration. I would love to see a world in which Vitalik left Ethereum, but we're not ready for that world yet. And I don't think EOS is ready for Dan to leave either. And I don't think he's going to. I've read his statements as well. I don't think he's going to, but his obvious history of going on and starting new stuff.
Well, it's because he didn't make any money on those projects.
Would be trouble.
No, it's called the business people took advantage of the developer in past projects. They didn't take advantage. It wasn't his core competency to understand how to, for things to go the way that he needed them to go relative to his participation. In the EOS scenario, it was very different because there were people like Brendan and myself and others that architect things in a way that is fair to all participants. Meaning it's his, but I want to add one point to that. The cult of personalities is essential for almost any project to get off the ground. All things start centralized. All things that are going to be successful start centralized. You have to have a group of people that are like, we're going to go build this thing. We're taking this mission on to go to make this thing happen. And then the question is, absolute power corrupts absolutely. So what happens is most people, when they start building these centralized systems, end up finding themselves in positions of ownership, positions of control, positions of mass influence, and it's in their economic interests and over time to continue to keep it that way. When a project reaches its point where it's gotten escape velocity, where it's gotten enough velocity that it's going to, break out of the, atmosphere of sorts, I think it's actually not a bad thing for, people in those positions of leadership to become better stewards, which is to relinquish, that influence to some degree. I don't think it's a bad thing. I think that.
But it should be. I think it should be planned. It shouldn't happen. In an ideal world, you kind of have that. You set a plan for your departure and give people a year or 2 years for you to step out of that role, for people to fill that void, and to ensure the success of the project long term. But it's a natural evolution of things for people to leave. So it just needs to be done thoughtfully.
You're basically describing
every good leader has succession planning.
You're basically describing George Washington, right? He came over, and that's a famous painting of him giving away the sword. He's like, I don't want to stay in power.
Okay, so you guys are talking about cryptocurrency blockchains having a social impact and it impacting the third world countries and people in poverty. So once cryptocurrencies and blockchain becomes more mainstream, as of right now, Bitcoin has 21 million units of Bitcoins. It's fixed. Of course, there's 3-4 million of them that are lost. Now, how do you guys solve? How would blockchain solve the problems of income inequality and disparity?
They don't. And that's not the point. The Gini coefficients, which are kind of a measurable way to determine economic inequality in any given society, are just as bad in any blockchain or crypto asset ecosystem as they are in the real world. In fact, worse. But that's not the point. people say it's gonna make the world more equal. It's not. The rich are gonna get richer. The people that own more crypto are gonna be richer than the poor. But the difference is we will now have financial inclusion for the poor. We will have tools for individuals to empower themselves and actually have access to online commerce and interact with people around the world in a financial manner. And that's economic empowerment. I'm not promising to make people rich. I'm promising to give them the tools to make themselves rich. And that's a very important distinction. This is as much as kind of Satoshi's vision had these Marxist components to this, this is a very libertarian, crypto-anarcho vision. And at the end of the day, if you're going to become wealthy in this space, it's going to be because you do it yourself. We're just here to give you the tools to realize that.
Equal access to wealth, empowering people. But there are scenarios where this can have an impact. Clearly it's not been developed successfully, but you take concepts like universal basic income. I don't like that term because it's politically loaded. I prefer the term universal basic sustenance. But take EOS for example. EOS has a worker proposal system where theoretically up to 4% inflation can be created on the network, and the community or the token holders can vote on where that goes. But theoretically, if we as the EOS community so chose, we could take that 4% annual inflation and spread it around equally to every wallet holder that's used the identity system on the planet. Theoretically, instead of the inflation going to the central bank, the central banks creating inflation, passing it to the incumbent banks that hand it out, we could just put money in every single person's hands around the planet at a fixed rate if one so chose. And that could be voted on with EOS today. And there are other networks that will clearly attempt to try and tackle that issue, but this is a very, very, very hard problem to solve. And unclear whether or not it will be solved, but I want to make sure that I point out that if that's something that you care about, it might be possible. So
I think that
hopefully someone goes and tackles these big issues.
I think one of the interesting things is that we are living in a cultural shift, that we are demanding accountability and equal rights, and one of the things that blockchain creates, somewhat to your point, is economic opportunity, right? Like for a 10-year-old kid that's a refugee in Syria, like there's opportunities for them to prosper, right? So Adam, the next question, and we'll just do maybe 2 or 3 more questions.
So the future of blockchain in regards to protecting against quantum, this kind of quantum proofing in the future, it's the only thing that could actually potentially break, cryptography in any one of the blockchains. What are your guys' thoughts? This is going to be disrupting for many, many years to come. What are your thoughts of how Bitcoin in general, how cryptocurrency in general, other than Tangle, like IOTA, other than that, what are your thoughts on that?
I think we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. We all know that quantum computing can break the cryptography behind almost every blockchain.
No, not just blockchain. It breaks everything.
Yeah, it breaks everything. Yeah. It breaks all security.
We got bigger problems than blockchains.
Like a global financial system.
Everything goes, all security, we have to go back to pen and paper unless we have a solution.
And there are lots of proposals for this. There are lots of cryptographers thinking about this. When quantum resistance becomes necessary, quantum-resistant consensus algorithms will be deployed. But the notion that we need to deploy them now is farcical. It's not going to happen
Until you actually know what you're having to tackle.
Exactly.
It's called, here's a theoretical issue, we have theoretical answers to theoretical issues, but you don't start building practical, real solutions until there's a real problem on the horizon.
These quantum-resistant blockchains are jokes. It's just, one, they're generally not blockchains. 2, there's really no point because we don't know how quantum computing is going to evolve. And until we know how it evolves to the point where it can break crypto, there's no point in trying to develop algos for it.
One other question in regards to microtransactions. How do you guys see the development of cryptography, blockchain in the future, where things are going from microtransactions?
I don't think microtransactions need to occur on chain. You can put them on chain, but that's kind of dumb. The fact is that microtransactions can happen off chain, on Bitcoin even, with the Lightning Network, and that works really just as well because microtransactions, you're not worried about censorship resistance. You're not worried about someone stealing your 25 cent or 0.01 cent transaction Thus, it doesn't need to be on-chain and validated by the network in real time. You can wait a few hours for that transaction to be validated in a batch. And so I think that's the future of microtransactions. You know, Satoshi had this vision that we could have microtransactions on-chain. But even on the EOS, I don't think really want that.
I think it'll end up being on-chain eventually. But in the short term, there are solutions like Lightning and others that will solve for it. And where we're going to use it is going to be with things like energy.
Mm-hmm.
When you start to have peer-to-peer energy solutions, microgrids, smart grids, where you're uploading power to the community from your solar grid and you're drawing down. These are the scenarios where you're going to see where microtransactions, I think, are one of the most viable.
Yeah.
Sylvia with Logos Capital here. Hey, Brock, good to see you again since your big debut in New York. In regards to now we're talking about Venezuela. I was just in Cuba not too long ago. I'm the president of the Government Blockchain Association. I have central banks calling me, asking me to give them advice and flying me out to South America. Do you see, and I guess this is more a two-part question. And the first is, the wealth gap is apparently not decreasing, but increasing with late adopters, early adopters of crypto. Maybe what do you envision might be a way to step in and do something about that in terms of closing the gap and financial inclusion? And then does that dovetail, if at all, with a co-living environment between digital currencies that are backed by central banks, together with the decentralized crypto assets? I don't know if that makes sense. Right, so
you're going to have governments are going to be issuing their currencies using this type of technology going forward, and so you are going to have crypto fiat, not in a tether type of environment. You're going to have actual central banks using this technology to issue their currencies. You have a number of governments around the world that are already, it's work in progress.
But that doesn't really solve any of the problems that the cryptocurrencies are currently trying to address. They're really just creating an Orwellian form of money in which they can track every single transaction that their citizens make. It's kind of the antithesis of what cryptocurrencies were intended to do, and in my view, it's not particularly interesting. It's just a digital fiat, and I don't think it will really do much for the global economies except make governments wealthier because they have to print less money, and it's easier to control the printing of money because it's all entirely digital. But it's not the point of blockchain technology, and it's not particularly interesting to me.
And if you haven't seen Jeremy's Twitter, it's Make Orwell Fiction Again.
Yeah.
Isn't that the background picture?
Exactly.
I'm going to introduce the next question, or the person asking the question, because she's one of my partners in crime here in South Florida, educating the community and advocating. She runs Crypto Mondays Miami. I believe she helped kick off Crypto Mondays in Puerto Rico. This is Erica Jumma.
Guys, first I just want to say that thanks for coming to Miami. Miami is going to be the new hub for blockchain. I think Jeremy's going to help us with that. But you definitely mentioned a lot about the Philippines, which I agree with you 100%. My background is partially Filipino, but do you see any other countries that are just as ripe for disruption as the Philippines are? Because definitely the government is on board, the people are on board, and then the technology adoption is there. But do you see any other countries that compete with them?
The Philippines is uniquely well situated to be, kind of first mass market adoption. I think there's parts of Africa. Uganda is the one that stands out to me as being the most interesting right now, but there are other parts of Africa.
Zimbabwe is interesting.
I think South Korea is also very interesting because of gaming, but it's now, you're seeing, they were the first market to get broadband internet, very similar to the Philippines. They're far ahead of us in a lot of ways that most people just don't understand. The thing that excites me most about there is the potential of the unification of the Korean Peninsula. Switch, which is a group of my friends, I've been given 2 honorary ambassadorships in Korea. I do a lot to advocate for them. And so we were just over there, and one of my partners, they're working on building a solar peace park in the demilitarized zone to bring power to the people on both sides. So some cool stuff going on over there that, you know, is just really far ahead of everything else you see in the world. Venezuela, as I said, for the wrong reasons. Argentina, you know, Puerto Rico, you know, places like Miami, because of people like Jeremy and I. If you get a really strong champion or a really, you know, influential evangelist, you know, I mean, this is part of the reason I'm in Puerto Rico. Is I figured out that I'm enough of a nexus point. Anywhere I go in the world, people show up in large numbers. And so I could live in New York, I could live in London, I could live in Hong Kong, but that doesn't, I'm not going to make these places any better by being there. And so I'm like, well, if I'm a nexus, and people go wherever I go, let me go somewhere where, you know, they don't have any opportunity, where they don't have any chance of participating in the fourth industrial revolution. And let's go see if we can tip the scales. And that's the experiment. And, you know, so far it seems to be actually going quite well.
Yeah, I don't have too much to add to that. Follow the developers, though. I mean, people are going to create localized solutions to local problems, and that's how this is really going to kick off. And I think the Philippines is probably the most promising. I mean, from what I've heard, they have more blockchain developers than in the United States. So yeah, I mean, and Consensus has a big office there. And, you know, there are just a tremendous number of coders. They all speak English, and it's so ripe. But you need the developers. They're not going to adopt American solutions. So when I get a lot of these social impact pitches, they're like, oh, we're going to go create solutions for like Latin America. But there's not a single Latin American co-founder, and I'm like, get out of my office. You don't know the problems that these people have. You're not immersed with these people. Until you actually have experienced immersion or in developing solutions for the people experiencing problems, you're not going to create the right solutions. You're going to create a solution looking for a problem.
Well, this is part of the problem. The government of Chile brought me down a couple of years ago with a group of other, you know, tech entrepreneurial investor types. And we were meeting with the government, and they're like, so what do we do? How do we, you know, improve things here? And we're like, well, you're kind of in trouble. Everyone that graduates from your universities has a marketing degree or a business degree. You don't have any engineers. You don't have any builders. Everybody wants to be a chief. You know, everybody wants to be the chef. And you don't have builders. It's going to be a major issue. One of the things about Puerto Rico that most people don't know, it's the only place in the United States where women make more than men. The first female mayor in the history of the United States was a mayor in San Juan, Puerto Rico. That you have more bachelor degrees per capita than any part of the United States. You have more artists per capita than any part of the United States. The number 15 engineering school in the United States is there. That's why Facebook, Google, Exxon, NASA have full-time recruiters, because there's no jobs. But they've got talent. I mean, I think the data points I just gave you, Puerto Rico's got talent. Incredible engineering talent. Unfortunately, there's not venture cap. There's no funding there for startups. But now, I mean, this is what we're changing. Is now you have Puerto Rican startups getting funded. We just held we just did our last event, Restart South. We held the first ever hackathon in Ponce, and this is one of the gifts we bring, is we instill an entrepreneurial culture. We teach young entrepreneurs in Puerto Rico that if they have a dream, that vision can become a reality now, because you have the angels that are present. You know, you've got the mentors. You now have the startups. You don't have to become part of the diaspora, you know, to have an economic opportunity. You can stay home if that's where you want. And, you know, now the tools are present for your dreams to become a reality.
All right, we're going to do two more questions, and then give Jeremy and Brock a break.
Hey guys, thanks for making it out today. So in the theme of all this real trade, this is kind of, I guess, open for the panel here. You know, my core business has been real estate, and you know, some of the challenges which I see in the transactions of crypto is educating one side to go, wait, you want to pay for it? Wait, you want me to receive it? Okay, fine, let's just, you know, translate it into dollars. Sure, okay, fine. And it just kind of ends up seeming like a marketing step that ends up happening, that someone's able to kind of, you know, flag it up and say, hey, I did a transaction this way. Hey, I securitized the property this way. So in leaning more towards, I guess, the commercial side of it and kind of pulling out the liquidity, of it. I'm not, after company that I end up meeting, like the one thing that I end up, keep coming back to is enough of these sellers, or owners, they're in the business, they know how the business works. So for them to go ahead and securitize a property doesn't really make too much sense to them unless there's something on the other side of saying, hey, look, creating this liquid market is going to allow you to get 5% more, 10% more by aggregating that, from your pool rather than just going to a single lender or a single buyer firm. What are you seeing, or what are you guys seeing in terms of the space that actually make financial sense in terms of reducing the friction or making it more profitable to really get crypto and real estate hybrids?
In the immediate term, we're still in the very early, prototyping phase, and so it's not probably financially beneficial today, because someone has to be the pioneer. Someone has to go do these first transactions, structure the market, make the market. It's not going to be financially disadvantageous, but until you get all the pieces in place, until the bridges, the roads, the tunnels are there, it's not something I would be pursuing if you're looking to make an extra buck. If you're interested in being a pioneer and helping pave the way for what will be a massive market in the future that does do all of those things, this is the time that you get in. And if you're building a business or a platform that might be enabling that, obviously there's great economic benefits down the road if your platform ends up becoming one of the successful platforms enabling all of this. But in the early days, you're normally just doing the hard work, and normally you're not going to get much for it, if anything. That's just welcome to being an entrepreneur. It's just
I've got a three-part answer here. First part, 95% of the startups in this industry are crap. You're probably seeing those 95%. So yeah, a lot of the shit people are doing doesn't make sense, or there's some gap missing. Once again, like I said, you really have to go through a full immersion before you truly understand this technology and are able to actually build a startup in this ecosystem. Second, there's a tremendous amount of demand on the sell side for tokenization. Anyone that has a large real estate portfolio loves this idea because they can get liquidity for the properties they own without selling them or without leasing them.
You've got refinancing options in traditional.
They don't want to refinance. They want to fractionalize ownership so they can sell parts of their building and generate cash flows and distribute cash flows and then reinvest the money from the tokenization into a new real estate project.
And how does that differ then from either turning it into a REIT or turning it into a co-op?
Because you have to do it with the entire property. Now you can take 20% of the property and tokenize it.
So the market opportunity is not where those types of tools are prevalent. There are no mortgages in Puerto Rico. There are many parts of the world where you don't have access to refinancing tools. The market is not going to take off in a place. It's like in the early days of Bitcoin, people come up to me and they'd be like, why should I want Bitcoin? And I would always play this reverse psychology game on them. I'd be like, you shouldn't. I'm like, what do you mean I shouldn't? I go, well, it's not for you. I'm like, what do you mean not for me? I go, do you have a bank account? And they'd be like, yeah. I go, I'm guessing you got a piece of plastic in your pocket that conveniently lets you pay for things too. And they're like, yeah. Like, the basic idea is, it's not here. It's not going to benefit, if you have access to a robust mortgage market with refinancing options and everything else, if you have a semi-efficient market, it doesn't mean that you won't benefit here. But it's not going to benefit you as much as it will in other places where there's less options available.
Really?
The market, the mass adoption occurs in places where it's going to improve the lives of people by an order of magnitude. When you're making things 5% better or 10% better, it will eventually happen, but it's slow going.
But real estate is the exception to this.
You went with your two parts of your...
Yes. But I will tell you, I've spoken to some of the largest real estate owners in New York City and Los Angeles, and they love the idea of tokenization. So I'm not a real estate guy. I don't own any real estate. I don't know anything about it except what I've learned in the process of this whole
I'm a real estate guy
tokenization.
from New York, so maybe that's the same.
But there is, from people that understand blockchain technology, there is a real desire to tokenize our properties. But part 3, there is no buy-side demand yet. So there's a bunch of liquidity in terms of real estate and properties that want to be tokenized.
Tremendous sell side.
But on the buy side, there's no demand yet. We haven't built it up yet. And so that's the biggest
Well,
problem.
the sell side demand there is because people are going, my property's worth $1 million, maybe I can get 1.1 million out of these crypto people.
Right.
It's largely because they think they're going to get more bang for their more buck for their property, whatever it is. The thing that's interesting to me, if you find things, what I'm looking for in the real estate side of things is I'm looking for the owner of the Empire State Building, the Eiffel Tower, the Khalifa Dubai, Hong Kong Shanghai Banking
Well, the
Corporation.
Empire State Building did that, but not.
It was crowdfunded.
They did it in a REIT scenario.
Yeah, but
the Empire State Building was the first crowdfunded piece of property in history.
But my
Blockchain.
yes,
Yes,
my,
a long time ago.
I'm on board with you guys.
I'm interested in, it's back to buy side demand. You need something that's high profile enough. By the way, a Trump building would go well too. But stuff that where you're going to get in the same way that Trump got a tremendous amount of free media.
Yeah.
You want a flagship, high profile deal that will create and generate a tremendous amount of media, a tremendous amount of awareness, and not at your expense, which could theoretically create some of that buy-side demand, on-chain or off-chain. But no one's going to write about that story today if it were off blockchain. The fact that you were doing the Empire State Building or something like it, on blockchain would likely get you a tremendous amount of press, which in theory should create some interest.
It's like doing the first real estate listing for online in 1993 for a house in Minnesota. The likelihood that your buyer is going to be online trying to buy that house in Minnesota, they're probably not going to be there. So you need to attract people, and we're going to get there. I mean, what the guys from Harbor are doing right now is really interesting. There's so many real estate plays in crypto that I'm not going to try to name them, but we will get there because the property owners want to do this. The buyers will eventually come, but it's a process, and it's a chicken and egg problem.
I don't need to write blockchain for my business, but I'm doing it because I educate people about it as I go along.
And this is our last question, right?
Yes, last question.
Yes, what do you guys think is the biggest threat to this crypto evolution that we're witnessing today?
Biggest threat.
I think becoming Wall Street 2.0 terrifies the shit out of me. I mean, I came into crypto as the only kind of liberal or progressive in the industry. They used to invite me to all the dinner parties because we could have arguments about libertarianism versus liberalism.
So where do you stand now?
I'm a bit more libertarian. But I was at Occupy Wall Street, and that's what brought me to Bitcoin. It wasn't a hatred of the government as much as it was a hatred of the banks. And coming into this industry, I was surrounded by all these really nutso guys like Brock, and they were there like, we're going to tear down the system, and I loved it. I mean,
That wasn't me.
I know, but you're still not.
I'm still in that.
Exactly. Anyway, Brock wasn't saying that. There were, a lot of our friends were, and I could relate to that. I was always a rebel, and seeing what blockchain technology has become as we kind of, we were very much responsible for taking the term, pushing from Bitcoin to blockchain because we needed a massive rebranding in 2014. But seeing how that got embraced by the banks, and seeing how all the world's largest financial institutions have come and reappropriated this technology, it's been to this point an incredible Trojan horse because it's brought this tech to the mainstream, and people are now hearing about it and getting involved and doing more radical things than what the banks are doing. However, there's so much glee over what the banks are doing that we're forgetting kind of the radical cypherpunk roots of this technological movement, which are to move away from centralization, to move away from large financial institutions, move away from big government, and have something that it returns sovereignty to the individual. And a lot of the biggest announcements that we see occurring in this space today, all are really just the reemergence of Wall Street in tech. And that's not interesting to me. And so we can't allow them to cannibalize this industry into something that it was not intended to be.
Technology is neither good nor bad. Right? Guns don't kill people, people kill people. How we use this technology and the intentions, behind the people that are building these systems and the things that we continue to build on top of it will determine the outcome of whether or not this technology makes the world a better place or not so much in maybe the way that Jeremy was describing. The biggest threat is the intention of the people that are building things. And I like bear markets because it gets rid of the people that are here for their own reasons.
Do you think governments have a role because stopping it or
Governments always have a role. I mean, I've spent a lot of my time over the years educating governments around the world. I mean, I meet with, I was just in London 2 days ago. I was at the U.S. Ambassador's house. I was giving a talk with Henry Kissinger and James Baker and had MI6 and all these types. I spent a lot of my time educating governments because it is natural that we fear that which we don't understand. And when people are afraid, they make interesting decisions, not necessarily very good decisions. And the way that you conquer fear is with knowledge. And so I spend a lot of time educating governments so that they make good decisions versus bad decisions, rather than fear-based decisions. So regulators make sensible regulations rather than nonsensical ones. And so that's one of the roles I've played in the industry the last 5 or 6 years. Is because if you want your local government to make good decisions, they need to be well informed. And unfortunately, whether we like it or not, government has a major role to play in all of this. The reason why the Philippines is going to do so well is because the government is on board. Now, the government doesn't have to be on board for the inevitable to happen. The inevitable is the inevitable. But if you want to see it happen fast, and if you want to see it happen as an evolution, not a revolution, it's ultimately in designing things that are win-win, where everybody that can win wins as much as possible.
But governments are not the existential threat I think we all viewed them as 5 years ago. Back then, there was a real fear of blanket bans, ignorance of policy making, but collectively as an industry, we've done an incredible job lobbying, reaching the right people across the world, but especially in the United States, where we haven't seen incredibly cumbersome regulation. I personally...
It's a miracle that we got this far.
I am incredibly pleased with the state of regulations globally, and I think governments are much less the threat they once were to the progression of this industry.
But that's in part because a bunch of us spent time
and money
explaining to governments how important this technology is. That this innovation, is a big deal. This is the fourth industrial revolution. If you regulate it out of existence, it won't go away. You won't be a beneficiary of it. It'll leave your country, and your country will be left behind. And helping people understand that. And we've been very successful in getting it this far. Those of us that did that work, and I encourage people to spend time with local regulators, to spend time with local government.
Your local representative.
They play an important role in the adoption of the technology in your local market, because they have the levers by which they can create economic incentives. They can create, look at Wyoming. People in this space are now all incorporating in Wyoming over Delaware. Because Wyoming has passed favorable legislation. The government has an important role to play in all of this to the extent, they make good decisions, and good decisions will be made because they've been educated well.
I promise that was the last question. Will you take one more? No. Okay,
sure.
Thank you. All right, Matthew.
It's for a friend.
Hey guys.
I was with Alex 2 nights ago.
I'm Matthew. I'm the executive director of the Florida Blockchain Foundation. And I want to point out that you're right in terms of government. There are some initiatives locally that you guys need to follow, especially in the smart city environment.
Right.
So I encourage you to get in touch with companies like Beacon Council or organizations like Beacon Council with the project One Community, One Goal, for example, that you can relate to, and it links to companies, and they are very interesting initiatives in our field. And through the Florida Blockchain Foundation as well, we are going to link universities, government agencies, companies and individuals to sort of do the initiatives and have a coherent initiative for Florida and most importantly for Miami. So you're right, the federal government and state governments, two different things. There are many things that can be done through the city, and there are some authorities to do things, and they can do partnership with other cities, for example. They can build networks and supply chain, and noticeably a very interesting initiative between cities to collaborate.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Miami.
Thank you.
Thank you guys.
So Robin, what's the best thing to tell the, thank you very much, Sherry and Rob, appreciate it.
I could choose one for you.
Hey Robin, you want us to say next step, lunch, or?
Yeah, let's give everybody a break.